Hello, everyone. I want to start by thanking the Serene Risk team and Professor David Descarrier for inviting me to this event. I'm glad to be part of the revolution. Thank you also to those of you who are present during my presentation and who are listening to what I have to say. My name is Camille Faubert. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Temple University. I've been working since early 2019 on a research project led by Professors David Descarrier, Eileen Malm, Jerry Radcliffe, and Benoit Dupont, where the overarching goal is to assess the impact of police interventions online and on the dark web. And this project is divided into 4 phases. And the first phase was to review the literature on what works in policing cybercrime. The second phase was dedicated to evaluating the impacts of crypto market shutdowns by law enforcement on crypto market users by analyzing what they post on online forums after the platforms are closed. Maybe you heard my colleagues Isabelle Fraser and Geneviève Sophie Chauvin earlier, or maybe it's going to be right after, but they are talking about the results of this research specifically. And then on the third phase of the project, we studied if crypto market shutdowns had impacts on ties and relationships between dark web users and on the cohesion of the dark web communities. And lastly, in the fourth phase of the project, which is ongoing right now until next November, we are working at understanding the practices that cyber investigators use to do their work at fighting cybercrime, the unfolding of cyber investigations, as well as the perceptions that cyber investigators have of the impacts of their investigations and operations. So for the next 15 minutes, it's on this last aspect of the research project that I want to focus. We are therefore going to talk about what cyber investigators could share about the ways they do their jobs. And more specifically, I want to focus on their experiences with the dark web. And what I think is the most interesting and valuable part of this research is that we adopt an international perspective. And we had the opportunity to speak with cyber investigators from different countries. And I will tell you more about this when I'll give you all the details about our research methodology a little bit further along in the presentation. But the strength of this international perspective is that it would allow cyber investigators to learn from what is done in other countries. And before I really dive into the subject, I want to take this opportunity to thank all the cyber investigators, civilian analysts, and cyber team managers that took the time to speak with us for this project and that were very generous in sharing a lot of interesting information about the work that they do. And so I hope that they'll find that my presentation does justice to everything that they told me. So in order to dive into the subject, I want to start with a general background that sets the boundaries of our project. We are in an era in which cybercrime is everywhere. A lot of news reports of these kinds of incidents are published every day. So there are a few examples shown here, but this is just a very small proportion of everything that is published in the media. And in our study, we assess law enforcement perceptions and practices. So we considered a wide variety of different types of cybercrime: stolen data and fraud, ransomware, internet child exploitation, and others. And the cybercrimes that we considered could target various types of victims, which can be individual people, small companies, and also large private or public corporations. So in the examples that cyber investigators shared with us, some took place in the plain old clear web, but others involved the darker side of the web, or the dark web. And it's about this last category that I want to talk about today. But within the use of the dark web, we kept a broad definition of cybercrime because we were interested in knowing in general terms what police do about cybercrime and how they deal with it. Our goal was to have a general and broad overview of the work of cyber investigators without focusing precisely on one category of crime. We were interested basically in going behind the scenes and behind these media reports to understand the work police do online, how their investigations unfold, and how the dark web impacts their work. So, and what better way of knowing what police do online than to ask police officers themselves to explain to us how they work? And so this is what we did. We used a qualitative methodology to achieve our research goal. And starting in March 2020, we conducted 26 interviews with people working in law enforcement that have very diverse profiles. They were mostly police officers at the ranks of detectives and sergeants, but they were all working either for cybercrime units or they were focusing on cybercrime. They were focusing strongly on cybercrime in their work. And we also spoke with a few civilian employees of law enforcement organizations. And our participants were from 6 different countries. So Canada, the USA, Australia, the UK, the Netherlands, and Sweden. And they worked for police organizations of different levels. So we spoke with people from local or municipal agencies, people from state regional organizations, and people from federal national police forces. We've spoken with 24 sworn officers in total and 2 civilian analysts, 8 women and 18 men. And our participants were aged on average 42 years old, and they had on average 17 years of policing experience. And all of our participants together had a total of 453 years of policing experience, which should give quite insightful research results, because these people have been on the job for a while and they are very skilled at conducting investigations. And so to give you an overview of who they are and how they became part of a cybercrime unit, most of them were patrol officers before joining the cybercrime unit. But this, of course, is not sufficient to thrive in this type of investigations and to fit in well. So we also noticed that our participants all had a high interest and knowledge base in technology and everything cyber. As one of our participants said, someone who has trouble sending an email, the cybercrime unit is probably not the best place to work, which does make a lot of sense. And so as we discussed with these investigators, we came to understand that when police agencies wish to start putting resources into cyber investigations and want, for example, to set up a cybercrime unit or task force, they turn first to the officers who are most technologically oriented and they build from there. So some of them were technologically oriented because they had a specific previous training in computer science or programming. So some of them had pre-policing backgrounds in computer science and programming. As participant 8 said, not as many people have a background in IT. And my mind was in IT, so I transferred pretty easily into cybercrime. So he was a perfect candidate for the cybercrime unit. But it's not all of the investigators we talked to that had this educational background. Others were known to be drawn to technology and more interested by it as a hobby, and they learned more skills on the job. And some of them even were self-taught. And so any officers who shows a particular sensitivity to new technologies could be a good candidate for the cybercrime unit. And then many of the investigators we spoke to said that their interest for fighting cybercrime grew from there, out of this professional opportunity that they got. And lastly, a few of them explained that they were transfers from other related units within the agency. So they were already working for other units in the police organization that conducted investigations that overlapped a lot with the work that is done in the cybercrime unit, for example, in the digital forensics unit, internet child exploitation unit, and the fraud and white collar crime unit. So one of the major themes that we discussed with our participants was the dark web. Most of them said that they didn't have a wide experience conducting investigations on the dark web, but they all knew and had a good idea of what the dark web is. Most officers from local and municipal agencies, when we introduced the topic of the dark web, started by saying that they don't really use the dark web in their work, mostly because they're already overwhelmed with work related to what happens on the clear web. But as the interviews and the discussions unfolded, I started to notice that this isn't quite true. What they meant is probably that being in municipal agencies, they don't arrest dark web offenders and they don't close dark web platforms like in the high profile interventions from the FBI, for example, but they still access the dark web and use the dark web as a tool to gather intel. And so to understand how these investigations work on the dark web, we asked our participants to explain to us what triggers these dark web investigations. And they told us that there are two main types of triggers that launch an investigation. The first is victim complaints, which is like for any type of crime where it's a victim's call that triggers a police response. So it's more of a reactive approach. So this reactive approach can happen as well in dark web investigations. And these victims can be individuals, companies, or large corporations. But they also told us about detection, where they use keywords in order to go onto the dark web and find specific types of crime. So this is more of a proactive work. And they will use different keywords depending on the type of cybercrime they are looking for. And from using these keywords, they start to dig, they gather intel, and then they eventually stumble upon a case that they deem useful to investigate. So within the cybercrime unit, investigators tend to specialize in one type of cybercrime, like internet child exploitation, fraud, digital piracy, drug crime. So they use the keywords for detection that are associated with the type of crime that they are trying to detect. So this is one way of using keywords in detection. But others also explain that their detection is based on finding evidence about the physical location of offenders. Because what they want to do is target offenders that seem to be physically in their jurisdiction by what they share and say online. And some of them will also use or get evidence of this by the languages that are spoken by the offenders on the dark web. And also we talked with our participants about the aims of their investigations. Typically, typically the goal of a police investigation is to arrest offenders. But their aim when working on the dark web is a little different because the dark web adds a layer of complexity to their work by providing offenders with anonymity. So their aim is mostly to get the offenders out of the dark web and into the clear web to identify them. So this aim is kind of a preliminary step to considering a future arrest. So as participant 11 is saying in the quote on the slide, is, when they are in the dark web and using Tor, they feel pretty safe and protected. So we need to try and get them off of the environment that they feel comfortable using. And investigators will do this through a failure of the technology of the offenders. So technology isn't infallible. So the offenders sometimes don't manage to hide their identity 100%, but also they can get them out of the dark web by gaining their trust. For example, in internet child exploitation cases, the investigators can make contact with the offenders they are investigating either as a like-minded offender or as a child, and then they work in order to gain their trust and eventually gather enough personal information that will allow to identify them. And so through the discussions that we had with the cybercrime investigators, we came to the conclusion that investigations on the dark web aren't all that different from other cybercrime investigations. And this is mostly because most of the suspects who are active on the dark web are also active on the clear web, and they have used clear web websites and Gmail addresses and things like that. So as participant 3 said, when we browse the web or the dark web, I don't really make any distinctions. It's a place like any other. But the dark web certainly makes investigations more complex and time-consuming. So the investigators see it as an additional obstacle to their work, but they tend to see the big picture and use the same strategies to investigate the dark web and the clear web. And it seems that it's these links that they make between the dark web and the clear web that are their best chance of success in their investigations. However, investigations on the dark web are more complex and time-consuming because they are associated with a specific set of challenges for law enforcement. And one of the major challenges they face in dark web investigations is that cooperation is not to be expected. In comparison to clear web investigations, where cooperation from internet service providers and social media platforms is often requested by law enforcement and granted, on the dark web, cooperation from platforms is not to be expected, which means that police are pretty much on their own in their investigations. Participant 13 said that in terms of requesting information, that's certainly not expected that you will get a lot of cooperation. Also, another of their challenges they face is the lack of comprehension or understanding from bosses and prosecutors. So they feel that their bosses and the prosecutor don't necessarily understand why dark web investigations take so long and why the outcomes or results seem so small in proportion to the time invested. Participant 5 said that our bosses, they are displeased because to them, if you put 6 months of efforts and manpower into this, you should be able to identify these people. Also, they struggle with insufficient human resources. They all unanimously mentioned that the lack of human resources in their unit or line of work is what limits the work that they do on the dark web. So participant 8 said, our resources are stretched so thin. So what he's saying is that it's the lack of human resources that is preventing them from doing more proactive work on the dark web. So this brings me to ask the question, how dark is the dark web for law enforcement? We noticed through our discussion that it's less dark than it once was. Cybercrime units are growing. It's becoming a priority for law enforcement agencies, and officers are acquiring important technological skills, but there is still some work to do. And several participants have suggested ways to improve the impact of their investigations. And the first way that they suggest for the future is to develop strategies to disrupt the dark web. Participant 3 said that we have to find another approach. It would be, have a broader perspective and see how we can put sand in their wheels without necessarily always going for an arrest. Because the arrest approach takes a long time and the impact it's nothing in comparison to the pool of stuff that we can find online. So it's the identification of the suspect that is necessary to an arrest that is what is the most time consuming for them. So for the future, finding other ways to disrupt the dark web and to reduce crime on the dark web would be more efficient in their opinion. Also, they wish to have more resources to do proactive work, as we just discussed. They also would like stronger international cooperation. They all said that they have good partnerships and information sharing with some countries, but they wish for more standardized agreements between countries which would strengthen their investigative potential because of the nature of cybercrime, which tends to go beyond countries' boundaries and jurisdiction. And lastly, they would like to set up a system of confidential informants online. As participant 6 said, we just need to find the right person and turn him into an informant. This is a way that would make their interventions more efficient. And so this is just a part of the project we are currently conducting. Of course, we discussed other themes with our participants, such as investigative techniques, partnerships, and prevention. And of course, this will be part of our results presented on other platforms and in other events. Also, up until next November, we were initially aiming for at least 50 participants in our research. Right now we are at 26, so we will be conducting, especially this summer, around 24 additional interviews. And we hope to recruit participants from France, New Zealand, the UK, the US, and possibly any other country in the world that are involved in cybercrime investigations. So if you are listening and you are a cyber investigator anywhere in the world, don't hesitate to contact me to participate and to have a discussion with me about this topic. And last thing, we are planning a workshop on November 16th, 2021. So this is the day before the start of the ASC meeting in Chicago. If you are interested in attending, please visit Eventbrite, the page for the workshop on law enforcement operations and their impact and the dark web. You can either sign up to be present in person, or this event will be streamed live on YouTube if you're interested. So I'm sure we will have the opportunity to discuss this further and discuss this topic in more detail, either in person or virtually at many other events. And so I thank you for your attention. If you have any questions or any comments, or you would like to participate, or you would like to be part of our workshop, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you. Have a great day.